The Man in the Blue Cell. Before we begin, if you think you know how dark the human mind can get, think again. Subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments if you'd ever survive one night inside Wolston Prison, because after hearing this story, you might not even want to drive past it. The rain hit the corrugated roof like gunfire that night. Inside Wolston Correctional Center, the air was heavy, thick with humidity and fear. Guards patrolled the echoing corridors, their boots striking against concrete in an uneven rhythm. The time was 2:43 a.m. when the first alarm went off, a piercing metallic wail that tore through the silence of Unit C. In Cell 23, inmate Aaron Vale, a 29-year-old convicted arsonist, lay motionless on the floor, his pale body twisted unnaturally. His cellmate was gone. The door was locked from the inside, and on the wall, smeared in what looked like blood, were the words, "We never sleep." Senior Correctional Officer Ethan Marlowe was first on the scene. He'd worked the night shift at Wolston for 12 years, and nothing, not the fights, not the riots, not even the suicides, had ever made him flinch. But this was different. Vale's eyes were wide open, his lips curled into a frozen smile. There were no signs of struggle. No noise had been heard. It was as if he had just stopped existing. Minutes later, Detective Leah Grant, a homicide investigator from Brisbane, arrived at the prison gates. She'd been called out of bed by an urgent message, possible homicide inside Wolston. She wasn't new to crime scenes, but she'd never investigated one behind the walls of a maximum security facility. When she walked into Unit C, every inmate had gone silent. Hundreds of eyes followed her, some filled with hate, others with something worse, fear. "Who was his cellmate?" Grant asked the warden. "Name's Dylan Mercer," he replied. "Serving time for aggravated assault. Model inmate. Until tonight." But Mercer wasn't anywhere in the prison. His name didn't appear on any transfer logs. The CCTV footage of the wing had been wiped clean, the hard drive removed from the server room. Only one person had access to that system, Officer Marlowe. Grant noticed something odd about the crime scene. Vale's fingers were stained black, soot, not blood. When the forensic team swabbed it, they confirmed it was ash. But Wolston's incinerator was in another building, and no fires had been reported that night. By morning, the story hit local news outlets. Inmate dies mysteriously inside Wolston Prison. The Department of Corrective Services issued a short statement calling it an isolated incident. But inside, everyone knew this wasn't isolated. It was a warning. 2 days later, the security footage resurfaced, an anonymous email sent to Detective Grant's encrypted inbox. The file showed Mercer, pacing in his cell, muttering something over and over again. When Grant enhanced the audio, she could make out the words. "They said the walls listen. The walls don't forget." At 2:38 a.m., the lights flickered. Mercer pressed his ear against a concrete wall, whispering something no one could understand. Then suddenly his cell door unlocked itself. He stepped out, barefoot, glancing back at Vale, still asleep. Then the footage ended. Grant's first instinct was to suspect an inside job. Someone had helped Mercer escape. But the more she dug, the stranger it got. Marlowe, the officer who discovered the body, hadn't shown up for his next shift. When police searched his home, his wallet and phone were still there. His car was parked in the driveway, and on his kitchen table lay a piece of paper with 4 words scrawled across it. "He's still in there." By the end of the week, Wolston was on full lockdown. Every inmate was confined to their cell, every guard questioned. Rumors spread fast, whispers of a secret experiment, of inmates disappearing in the middle of the night, of a basement wing that didn't appear on any official map. Detective Grant requested full access to the prison's internal blueprints. The warden hesitated before handing them over. "You didn't get these from me," he muttered. "You start asking the wrong questions in this place, you end up like Marlowe." Grant studied the plans late into the night, tracing her finger across the faded ink lines. Then she saw it, an unmarked section beneath Unit D, accessible only through a maintenance hatch in the boiler room. There was no record of it in any database. When she returned the next morning with 2 officers and a warrant, the hatch was sealed shut with new welds. Someone had been there, recently. Cut it open, she ordered. The metal screeched as sparks flew. The smell of rust and decay filled the air. They climbed down into the darkness, a narrow tunnel lined with pipes and flickering bulbs. At the end was a heavy steel door, painted blue, numbered D0. Grant's flashlight trembled slightly as she raised it. Her voice was calm but cold. Open it. When the door creaked open, the light fell on a small room, empty except for a single bed and a chain bolted to the wall. On the mattress was a prisoner's uniform with the name tag D. Mercer, and beside it a folder marked Project Wolston. Grant opened the file slowly. Inside were photos of inmates, all marked as deceased. But every date of death was the same, September 17, 2019. The exact day Erin Vale had been transferred to Wolston. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she flipped the last page. There, stapled to the back, was a single Polaroid photo. It showed Officer Marlowe, standing beside an unmarked van, smiling. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, was Dylan Mercer. Alive. Watching. The van that never left Wolston. The discovery of Project Wolston should have been the break Detective Leah Grant needed. But instead, it opened a maze of lies that made her question everything she thought she knew about the justice system. By the next morning, the folder had vanished from the evidence locker. The chain of custody logs were blank. The only entry recorded from that night was a single line typed into the system at 3:12 a.m. Evidence relocated. Authorized by E. Marlowe. But Ethan Marlowe was officially listed as a missing person. Grant replayed the Polaroid over and over again. The van's license plate was half visible, smeared by sunlight. With enhancement software, she managed to pull out the numbers. QLD7XG 921. A prison transport vehicle. Reported scrapped 2 years earlier. Except, satellite footage from a nearby service station showed that same van leaving Wolston's north gate just hours after Vale's death. The timestamp, 3:06 a.m. The driver's face wasn't visible, but the silhouette in the passenger seat, it looked like Dylan Mercer. Grant drove straight to the transport depot listed on Wolston's records, an abandoned lot on the outskirts of Brisbane. The gate hung half open, creaking in the wind. Rows of rusted vehicles sat in the mud like carcasses. But at the far end, hidden behind a stack of old tires, she found it. The van. Same license plate. Same faded Wolston correctional logo. The air inside was suffocating. The seats had been ripped out, replaced with a steel cage bolted to the floor. Blood had soaked into the metal grooves. The forensic team later confirmed it matched 3 different DNA profiles, none belonging to Mercer or Vale. Grant's phone buzzed. A restricted number. She hesitated, then answered. Detective Grant. Silence. Then a distorted male voice. You shouldn't have gone there. Who is this? You're looking for Mercer. He's not what you think. The call ended. Grant tried tracing it, but it had bounced through 6 unlisted towers before vanishing into static. That night, she returned home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Her instincts kicked in. She drew her weapon, sweeping each room carefully. Nothing was missing, but when she entered her study, her laptop screen glowed faintly. A single file sat open, one she hadn't seen before. Project_Wolston_interview_logs. Inside was a video, time-stamped 3 months before Vale's death. The image was grainy, but the voice was unmistakable. Ethan Marlowe. Test subject 12. Name, Dylan Mercer. Transfer complete. Psychological conditioning began at 2,200 hours. Grant's stomach dropped as the second voice spoke, calm, clinical, almost rehearsed. He responded well to auditory triggers. Minimal resistance. Subject reports hearing voices from the walls. Side effects. Marlowe asked. Memory loss. Dissociation. Identity erosion. But he's functional. Loyal. Good, the voice said. He'll be useful when we need another incident. Then, faintly, a third voice came through, trembling, broken. Mercer's. Please, just make them stop. The screen went black. Grant realized what Project Wolston really was, a covert behavioral control program. Prisoners like Mercer were being used as test subjects. The goal? To create inmates incapable of disobedience. But something had gone wrong. The next morning, Grant confronted the warden in his office. "You were part of this," she said, dropping the photo and USB stick onto his desk. He barely looked up. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Then explain it." "Those inmates were never supposed to survive the trials." Vale wasn't killed, he was silenced. Mercer was the prototype that broke free. "Where is he now?" The warden leaned back, eyes glassy. "You'll never find him. He doesn't exist on paper. Not anymore." At that moment, the fire alarm blared throughout the prison. Officers shouted from the corridor, "North wing breach." Grant drew her weapon and followed the sound of chaos through the smoke-filled hall. Inmates screamed behind their doors as red lights flashed overhead. The air smelled like burning plastic. When she reached the security hub, every monitor showed static except one. Cell 23. Aaron Vale's old cell. On the screen, a shadow stood in the corner, motionless, head tilted upward. Grant ran toward Unit C, heart pounding. When she arrived, the cell was open again. A faint whisper echoed against the concrete walls, the same words Vale had scrawled in blood. "We never sleep." But this time, they weren't written. They were carved deep into the wall, fresh. Her flashlight caught movement behind her. She spun around, gun raised. "Show me your hands." A figure stepped out of the darkness, barefoot, wearing a tattered inmate uniform. His face was thin, pale, eyes hollow. "Dylan Mercer," she whispered. He didn't move, didn't blink. "You need to come with me," she said softly. "You're not safe here." Mercer looked past her, at the camera mounted on the ceiling. "They're still watching." "Who?" He slowly lifted his right hand. In his palm was a metal key, engraved with a number, D0. "The basement," he murmured. "That's where they finish what they start." Before she could respond, a gunshot rang out. Mercer staggered backward, blood blooming across his shirt. A correctional officer stood behind him, weapon drawn, shouting, "Drop your gun. Step back." Grant knelt beside Mercer as he gasped for air. He pressed the blood-soaked key into her hand. "Don't let them restart it." Then his body went still. As medics rushed in, the officer who fired lowered his weapon. His badge read Eve Marlowe. But when Grant looked up, Marlowe smiled and whispered, "I told you he's still in there." The basement files. Detective Leah Grant had seen death, corruption, and every shade of human cruelty, but nothing prepared her for what came after that night. The hallway outside cell 23 was chaos. Officers shouting, radios crackling, Mercer's lifeless body being carried out on a stretcher under flickering fluorescent lights. But all Grant could see was the key still clutched in her hand, the one Mercer had died protecting. Engraved with the code D0. The same number she'd seen on that hidden basement door. When she looked up, Marlowe was gone. The officer who'd shot Mercer, the man who shouldn't even exist anymore, had vanished into the smoke before anyone could stop him. 2 days later, Grant was placed on temporary leave. The official report claimed Mercer attacked first, that the shooting was justified, that her investigation had compromised security. Her requests for body cam footage were denied. Her case files were scrubbed clean. Every trace of Project Wolston gone. But Grant wasn't done. Late one evening, as rain lashed the streets of Brisbane, she sat alone in her car outside the prison's south wall. The windshield wipers kept time with her thoughts. She replayed Marlowe's last words over and over. "He's still in there." What if he didn't mean Mercer? What if he was still in there? At 1:12 a.m., she slipped through a maintenance gate she'd unlocked earlier using an old staff code. The prison yard was empty. The only sound was the hum of floodlights. Grant made her way toward the boiler building, where she'd first found the sealed hatch. This time it wasn't welded shut. The lock hung open, as if someone had been waiting for her. The tunnel was damp, colder than before. The air smelled like oil and rust. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness as she descended, hand brushing the concrete wall to steady herself. When she reached the steel door marked D0, the key slid in perfectly. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Inside, the room looked different. Cleaner. The bed gone. The chain removed. A metal table now stood in the center, with a single file folder and a reel-to-reel tape recorder on top. The folder's label read, "Termination Logs." Grant pressed play on the recorder. The tape hissed, then a voice filled the room, calm, bureaucratic, detached. Termination protocol initiated for all Phase 1 subjects. Memory replacement procedure incomplete. Remaining subjects displayed cognitive dissonance. Recommend full disposal. Another voice responded. Marlowe's. And Mercer? Unstable, but valuable. His psychological fracture allows remote influence. He can be directed through auditory commands. You mean controlled? Precisely. Project Wolston's goal was obedience. Mercer proved that fear can rewrite the human mind. Grant's pulse quickened. She realized Mercer hadn't escaped at all. He'd been released on purpose. A living experiment designed to obey until he broke free. She flipped through the folder, each page more disturbing than the last. Photos of prisoners strapped to chairs, electrodes on their skulls, notes about behavioral reprogramming. And, at the bottom, a signed authorization sheet. The signature was unmistakable. Ethan Marlowe. A noise echoed behind her, metal scraping against concrete. She turned, weapon drawn. Marlowe, she said quietly. You followed me. He stepped out of the shadows, uniform immaculate, eyes calm. You shouldn't have come back. You're behind this, she said. All of it. Mercer, Vale, they were your test subjects. He smiled faintly. Not mine. I just kept the system running. You think prisons are about punishment? No. They're about control. Grant tightened her grip on the gun. You experimented on human beings. He shook his head slowly. They were already broken. We just gave them purpose. You killed them. Marlowe's eyes glimmered under the harsh light. They were never supposed to live. She fired. One shot, center mass. He staggered back, falling against the wall. But as he slid down, he laughed, a low, eerie sound that echoed through the chamber. You can't stop it, he whispered. The program's still running. He slumped forward, blood pooling beneath him. Grant exhaled, lowering her weapon. The recorder still spun on the table, the tape hissing quietly. Then, through the static, a faint sound emerged, a voice. Mercer's. Detective Grant, they made copies. The words repeated, distorted, like a broken loop. They made copies, they made copies. Grant froze. Her flashlight flickered, then went out. The overhead light buzzed, dimming to red emergency glow. From the corridor came footsteps, slow, deliberate. More than one person. She grabbed the folder, shoved it into her coat, and backed toward the door. When she stepped into the tunnel, she saw them, figures in correctional uniforms, walking in perfect synchronization. Their faces blank, eyes unfocused. Every one of them identical. Copies. Grant ran. The tunnel light stuttered as the sound of footsteps grew louder behind her. She reached the ladder, scrambled up, and burst into the night air, gasping. Behind her, the hatch slammed shut. On its own. By dawn, she was gone. The Department of Corrective Services issued another statement. No irregular activity reported at Wolston Prison. But weeks later, an anonymous package arrived at the headquarters of the Courier Mail. Inside was a USB drive labeled Wolston Files. It contained audio recordings, photos, and one final message from Leah Grant. Her voice was steady, but cold. If this reaches you, it means they found me. Project Wolston was real. Mercer wasn't the only one. They're still operating, under different names, different prisons. Look at the funding records. Look at the private contracts. You'll see it. If you're watching this, remember, they said the walls listen. They weren't lying. The clip ended with static. No one ever heard from Detective Leah Grant again. But 3 months later, another body was found inside Wolston Prison, an inmate who'd never existed in official records. On the wall, written in fresh ash, were the words, "We never sleep." If you thought Wolston Prison was dark, you're not ready for what's coming next. Subscribe before the next story breaks.